The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. The 50s, when Bums Jints walked the streets of New York, and Roy Firestone was a twinkle in Mr. Firestone and Mrs. Firestone's eye. But he's here right now. Roy Firestone, how are you?
I'm great. How you guys doing tonight?
Good. Welcome.
You know, we miss you on
Roy.
a regular basis on ESPN, and wanted to catch up with you a little. And I did some research, and you had the ideal job as a kid.
Yes.
You were
Yes,
a bat boy in spring training, if I'm not mistaken, in Miami for your favorite team, the Baltimore Orioles.
Right. Still my favorite team. 40 years later, still is my favorite team. And I was very privileged to have that opportunity. I was there for several years. Many of the friends I made on that team are still friends of mine, the ones who are still alive, which is most of them, thankfully.
Naturally, and, unless you're good at seances and stuff like that.
Right, exactly right. And
you could be. Who knows? This is podcast.
You never know. That's right, exactly right. So I've been doing.
Okay, who were some? To be serious, who were some of those players? Not necessarily the name players, but who were some of those players that you befriended? As what, you were a 13-year-old kid, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, 14 years old, yep.
Okay.
Well, to this day, Brooks Robinson remains my biggest sports hero of all time. He's still very much alive, and he's been a friend of mine for all those years. In fact, he had actually, you may or may not know this, that he actually had me introduce his statue at Oriole Park in Camden Yards when they unveiled it, which was a massive thrill for me. He personally asked me to.
That's great.
Which is a wonderful thing. It's like, growing up in a different era, maybe Hop-Along Cassidy asking you to lasso with him or something. I don't know what you'd call that, but it was an enormous thrill for me. One of the biggest honors, probably in terms of public life, my most sacred honor of all. And it was very emotional for me, because he was my childhood hero, but also people like Brooks Robinson, I should say Jim Palmer, along with Brooks Robinson, the multiple Cy Young Award winner for the Orioles, one of the great pitchers of all time for that team. I've known Frank Robinson pretty much my whole life, much of my life. Most of these people meant a lot to me when I was a kid, and they still mean a lot to me now as friends.
That's great.
How did you get the job in the first place as a kid? I'm sure there were hundreds of kids that would have wanted to be in your cleats.
Well, the truth is that I grew up in Miami, Florida. There was no professional baseball there at all, no major league baseball, I should say. In fact, at the time when I was growing up, there was barely professional football. They just started in 1966, so I was 13 before I ever saw a professional football game. The Miami Hurricanes, of course, were down there, and they still are. But I always looked forward to spring training when the trucks would drive up every spring, and they would unlock all of their foot lockers and put up their uniforms in the clubhouse. And I knew that they were coming to town. I saw an article about it in the paper. I had my mother. He couldn't even drive yet. I had my mother take me downtown where the stadium was. It was a minor league stadium called the Miami Stadium, and it was also later named Bobby Maduro Stadium. But I waited out there until the trucks pulled up on the day it was supposed to be there and talked my way in. One thing led to another, and the next thing I knew, I was a bat boy, a clubhouse boy for the Orioles, and it was an enormous thrill for me because I had never really been up close to a ball player. And ironically, the very first player I ever got to meet was Brooks Robinson. He came up to me and started talking to me. He couldn't have been nicer. I'm within 20 minutes, I have a little uniform I put on, and I'm playing fungo with the great Brooks Robinson. So it truly was the biggest thrill at that time in my life. And also, Brooks, down through the years with me, we've become very close, and I've been very close with the family. And when he auctioned off every piece of memorabilia of any consequence in his life in Dallas, Texas, for a company called Heritage Auctions, which he gave all of it away all the money he made away to charity, all of it, every dime.
Isn't that wonderful?
And he had me host that. In fact, that is also on YouTube, where we looked at 16 gold gloves in front of us, and old uniforms and hats and bats and peacock belts and things of that like. So I've had a lot of personal mileposts with Brooks, and obviously he had some health problems in recent years. Seems like he's doing a lot better now, I hope. And whenever I do speak to him, it's a wonderful time. It's glorious for me.
Good.
Isn't that great?
You
It
mentioned
reminds me with
Roy
Jackie
off the air
Roosevelt.
that you do some work with Kareem.
Yes, coming up in the fall, I will be doing a lecture tour of the life and times of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. It's called Becoming Kareem, and I will be the host. Kareem will be talking about every aspect of his life growing up and his 7 greatest mentors of his life. We will project video screen visuals, tape, film, rare photographs. We're even going to put a basket on the stage, and he's going to show me about slam dunks and also sky hooks, and should be a lot of fun. So that begins in September.
Okay, if you have a pencil,
Wonderful.
can you jot this down?
Sure.
When Kareem played Little League ball, it was at Wynwood Little League. And he was a pitcher, and he pitched to my buddy.
Mm-hmm.
And he pitched to my buddy who was the catcher on that team. His name was Len Rosenblum.
Wow.
So if you'll remind him of that,
I will.
Len remembers him. He's not likely to remember Len, and Len remembers him as Lewis. So, and maybe you can shed some light on how Kareem, who was all set to go to St. John's in Queens, where I grew up, ends up going to UCLA. Can you tell me that story, Roy Firestone?
I absolutely can, because it wasn't a done deal. It wasn't completely as far along as you say it was at St. John's. He had considered St. John's, was seriously considering it, but the 2 of the greatest heroes of his life at the time were Jackie Robinson and Ralp Bunch, who was a famous civil rights attorney, and also UCLA. He also was inspired later by Arthur Ashe, who also attended UCLA at the same time. But Kareem went to UCLA on a recruiting trip, and the first person he met essentially was John Wooden. And John Wooden was talking more about his academic life than his athletic life, which impressed him and his family, because Kareem, as you would imagine, is a very, very scholarly type of person. He's a big reader. He's written 14 books. Many of them are bestsellers.
Jazz enthusiast. I remember when he tragically lost his record collection in a fire.
Exactly right. I was going to say he is a collector of Civil War gold coins. He's a historian, African American historian. He's a big. I think he probably knows more about jazz than just about anybody I've ever met in my life, and I know a lot of jazz people. You are right. There was a fire in his house, and to the kindness of many of whom were strangers, he was able to completely replace that collection and then some. So he learned a great deal of that, through that experience about the kindness of strangers. It was one of the best experiences of his life, even though it was tragic, to lose, all of those things. And by the way, not just the records, but many of his trophies and memorabilia and photographs, and all those things went down. And he also kind of learned that in life, as much as we love those things, they are just indeed things. And they're
material, and they're not spiritual.
No one in his family was hurt or killed, of course. So as painful as it was, he learned an important lesson about the kindness of people, and that things aren't really as important as they may seem in the moment compared to our mortality. So I thought it was a wonderful experience. It's also going to be part of the show to talk about that. And, we're very excited about the endeavor, because we think that, there are a lot of people who really don't know his story. Of course, he's
Sure.
the recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and he, along with people like Bruce Springsteen and Bill Gates and Diana Ross and Smokey Robinson and Vin Scully, he was more thrilled to meet Vin Scully to be on the same stage with him than he was with anybody.
I could well imagine.
He's also a major Dodger fan as well.
To illustrate that, I'll ask you, Roy, have you ever heard, and I'm sure you have, the last inning of Koufax's perfect game called by Vin Scully?
I have.
Is that something else? And does that make everybody who ever came on the radio say, I shouldn't be here?
Well, I'll tell you what's intriguing about Vin Scully's call of that game. For some reason, he seized upon the time. Baseball is not a sport that uses the clock. At least it hasn't been for most of 150 years. But for some reason, he said, it's 9:25. It's Chavez Levy.
Right.
He has that beautiful voice, but he set the drama apart from Koufax on the clock. It is 9:29. For some reason, there was a weight, meaning WEIGHT, to an anticipation too with the clock. And he, to this day, is not quite sure why he went to broadcast it that way, but I guess he was trying to chronicle history being possibly made in the moment. And
for the pitcher, I think he said once that he wanted to turn it over. There'd be a copy of it for the thrill the pitcher would get when his grandkids and the thrill that his grandkids would get and the pitcher's grandkids would get.
Correct.
The man was something else. Can you tell us, being an L.A. guy now, you grew up in Miami, a Vin Scully story, something about him that we may not know? I know he was a Giant fan like my dear old self growing up.
Yes, he was.
But
I will tell you one of the... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, he was a Melot fan, and you could find Melot in the crossword puzzle. It's 3 down, OTG.
Well, I'll tell you an amazing story, and it's one of the great stories that Vin tells. I had him as my honoree, for my charity that I've done, for 25 years just about in Los Angeles. He was my honoree, and this is a story that is just stunning. In high school, Vin was friends with a guy named Larry Miggins, and they were childhood friends. And Vin, as a kid, probably 10 or 12 years old, said, "Larry, when we get out of here, out of the Bronx, what do you want me to do? Or what do you want to do, I should say?" And Larry Miggins said, "I would love to be a big league ball player." And Vin Scully said, "I wonder what the odds are of that happening." And then Vin said, "Well, what I'd like to be is I'd like to be a big league broadcaster. I wonder what the odds are for that." And I said, How about this one for a long shot? How about you play, I broadcast, and you hit a home run? Okay? And nobody would be able to calculate the odds of that. Sure enough, in 1952, Larry Miggins got his first shot at regular big league playing baseball with the St. Louis Cardinals. The Dodgers played host to the Cardinals in May. Scully was behind the microphone, had a chance to call Larry Miggins' first at bat in front of him. Now, he had other at bats, but his first career home run was hit as Scully was announcing it, and he said, "This is truly incredible." It was the toughest home run call he ever had to call because he started getting emotional. He's trying to fight back tears. He hit the home run, by the way, off Preacher Row. He said home run, and he just sat there with a big lump in his throat, watching him run around the bases. And you say to yourself, how could that possibly happen? Well, in baseball, there's a lot of magic, and that was certainly one of the most majestic things in his career. So many wonderful things. I mean, I don't know how many scores of no-hitters and perfect games. I remember at one point in the mid-'90s, this is astonishing, because of the length of his career, Vin Scully called a no-hitter or perfect game, had 1/10. You think about this now. 1/10 of all the no-hitters and perfect games ever broadcast by in his base.
Can you imagine? Oh my God!
That shows you how many games he called.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
And better than anyone ever will. You know,
The
he
best
called
ever.
tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of baseball games. And you think about how many great moments he saw, how many mediocre moments he also saw, but
Sure.
always containing himself and carrying himself with a kind of poet laureate quality to his broadcast.
Absolutely.
Truly one of my favorite people. And you know,
Mine too.
He looked at baseball as a way to communicate. You know, of course, he loved the game tremendously, but it was also a way to broadcast his views of everything. In fact, one of the broadcasts he did late in his career, only about 4 or 5 years ago, and I saw it and I sent him a note about it. It was a Friday the 13th game. The Dodgers were at home, and for an entire inning, he talked about the folklore of the number 13 and why in different cultures the number 13 and Friday the 13th meant different things. Some of it good, some of it ominous. And don't you know that the final at bat in that inning was Hanley Ramirez, number 13. I mean, there was something magical about Vin Scully as an announcer beyond his obvious greatness and he had an unusual characteristic to his voice. It wasn't very baritone. It was almost a friendly sing-song kind of, almost like that, kind of a whole thing like that. You know, he had that kind of a thing.
And he is so imitated, and never does anybody have it down, because it's not how you say it, it's what you say. And he combines style with substance, which very few people have.
Well, you know, I once had this idea for a bit. You know, I perform all over the country. People may or may not know that. For corporations, I have a one-man show. I do performing arts centers. I talk about my career, but I also sing. I do a lot of things. And I thought, I don't do a great Vin Scully impression, but I said, wouldn't it be fun if Vin Scully had replaced Casey Kasem on American Top 40 while he was still alive? And so I thought about it. It was sort of like, well, our next song is a marvelous song by a wonderful new duo called the Captain and Tennille. Interesting to note that the captain is not a member of the military, and Tony Tennille is not a man but a woman. Here's the Captain and Tennille, and love will keep us together. I mean, I could hear him do that.
That's fabulous.
No, as a comedy writer, you take this 3-second Jack Benny pause, and you go, Tony Tennille is not a man but a woman. And you go, 1, 2, 3, and then you go, presumably.
Right, presumably. But anyway, you know, that is something.
Now I can say that I wrote for Roy Firestone.
There you go. Well,
is that all right?
Yes, indeed.
All right, I'm sure the check is in the mail or the female. You know, it depends on what state you live in. Hey, listen, guys.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
You said you were you had a time constraint, Mr. Firestone.
Well, I wanted to bring up one more thing, and that's wonderful story of Jackie Robinson. And I know you wanted to mention it. You may have probably brought it on this broadcast many times, but
yes, I
want
have.
to know if I will turn it around on you, Ron, and talk about why that relationship, and this is what we don't see much anymore in sports, changed your life and really inspired your life to do great things in the social scheme of things in life, activism and standing up for civil rights and all these other things. Why that simple gesture was able to be parlayed, if you will, into a kind of awareness, a self-awareness, as you became a young adult and adult.
Well, it's a good question. You know, as a kid, Roy, I loved him because he was helping my Dodgers win pennants. But as I grew up older, I realized how much more than just baseball he was and what he did for this country and this world. You know, they say Babe Ruth changed baseball. Jackie Robinson changed America, and he did it alone. And I learned a lot of this from my father, David Rabinovitz, who was a lawyer and later a federal judge. He was a Democratic National Committeeman for the state of Wisconsin, and he always fought for the underdog. He was a chief counsel for the UAW in a big strike in Wisconsin called the Kohler Strike. It was plumbing work. They make plumbing work in toilets and tubs.
Yeah, I know Kohler very well. I sure do.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Sheboygan, and my dad was ahead of his time. He was the first Democrat in Wisconsin to endorse Jack Kennedy. And Jack Kennedy, as a matter of fact, stayed at our home, as did Bobby. And he was the one that convinced Jack to run in the Wisconsin primary in 1960 because he felt if he could beat Hubert Humphrey in his backyard, it would help catapult him to the nomination. So Jackie Robinson was a Republican. But he was a
yes, he was
Republican. Yeah,
and he was also a friend of Richard Nixon's too.
Yes, he was. And my dad was at a Democratic National Committee meeting in Washington. Jackie happened to be there for a different function, and my dad took Jackie Robinson up to Jack Kennedy's suite to try and convince him to support him in the election. And he wouldn't do it. He said, what does a rich kid from Massachusetts, New England have any idea about the plight of the African Americans? And no matter what, he would not change his tune. He later admitted to me that he was wrong, and he did support Bobby Kennedy in 1968. But he saw a different light. I mean, he got sour with Nixon. He got sour with Eisenhower. And in many of the letters that he would write to me, sweet letters, he'd be telling me something as a kid, a guy to a kid. And then he'd say, by the way, tell your dad this or that. Ike has made me a Democrat. And then he'd say, the Democrats aren't doing what they should be doing. I'm back as a Republican. And he wanted, and at the time, it was understandable because the leadership of the Democratic Party were Dixiecrats. They were all bigots from the South, most of them,
Yes.
So it could be understood, But through my father and through Jackie, I learned a tremendous amount about taking care of people and standing up for what's right, no matter what. And Jackie told me this. He says, as a kid, he reminded me, don't ever back down on a cause you believe is right, no matter what the odds against you are. And that was something I always remembered. My dad was called Fightin'. That was his nickname because he fought for the underdog. He fought for the underprivileged. He was way ahead of his time. So other than Jackie and Jack Kennedy, my dad was certainly my hero.
Absolutely. Well, I want people to know, and I just realized this. I don't know if this is broadcast exclusively in Wisconsin or nearby, but I will.
No, this is internet radio.
Okay. Well, for you, Ron, I'm going to be performing my Kareem show in September on 3 separate nights in Milwaukee and also Oshkosh, I believe it is.
Okay.
Which we will love. I'd love to see you or anybody who's in the area who listens to this show would like to come out, meet Kareem and meet me, or come to the show. I guarantee you
that would be fabulous.
Well spent. So,
are you going to be in Minneapolis at all?
I don't have any plans at this point, but you never know.
Because that's where I live. I live in Minneapolis.
I see. Yeah. Well, my corporate schedule does not include Minneapolis right now, but I've done many, many things. In fact, not terribly long ago, I did a lot of charity work with Kirby Puckett, the late Kirby Puckett, and his foundation, his Heart Space. I think it was called HeartLink or something like that. His foundation.
Yes, it was.
And I was friendly. I was friendly with Mr. Polad, and I'd done many interviews with Tom Kelly and the old Twins players, and Rod Carew is, who, as we all know, is probably one of the most popular Twins of all time.
Wonderful.
Truly,
he's a friend of mine too. He's a friend of mine too.
He's a wonderful human being who has really learned to appreciate life so much more, having not that he didn't before, but having had the near-death he should have been dead. You know, he had a heart attack. He should have died.
Absolutely, he should have been dead.
He's had a heart transplant, as people know, and I just find him one of the more inspirational people that we always didn't get along when I was a member of the media. He didn't like the newspaper and TV people so much.
No, he didn't. He didn't. You're right.
As he grew older, and he started to realize how silly all of it was, he turned into a really beautiful human being, and I consider him a very close friend.
He's a great guy. Terrific.
Yep. Nice.
Yeah.
Hey, guys, may I just flash back for a second? Dixiecrat was mentioned, and you know it was the Dixiecrats that got the civil rights movement through Congress. Johnson.
Very begrudgingly.
Yeah,
you know,
very
absolutely. But I think it kept the country together at that time. It was ready.
They were able to. A lot of the civil rights legislation, as you would know, Ron, and you might also know, is in the wake of the assassination of President Kennedy, people were more willing to accommodate, or if you want to use that word, or go with Lyndon Johnson's agenda, which was basically JFK's agenda in trying to the Civil Rights Act. So the country was in a little bit better place than it is. Well, certainly was a lot better place than it is now. With the division and the discord, and yet there was still a great deal of pushback. Johnson, paid for it dearly politically, but he believed, there were a lot of things wrong with Lyndon Johnson, but there were a lot of good things too. And one of the things that was really good about him is he was a no-nonsense, pushback Texas lawman, and he wouldn't take any guff from anybody. And when he believed in something, he was relentless. And Richard Russell of Georgia, people who are lifelong friends, you could see it in a lot of the dramatizations, the LBJ thing that Bryan Cranston did last year, which was so fabulous. But
that was fabulous.
Lyndon Johnson, once he believed in something, and he did come around himself personally about civil rights. He was
he did.
Early on in his life, he was a segregationist in Texas, but he changed completely, and a lot of it was Lyndon Johnson, but also a lot of it was in the wake of JFK's assassination, where the emotions and the public felt, what can we do to keep the legacy of JFK alive? So that was some of it too. But I think the Dixiecrats, if you want to call them that, Richard Russell would have been one, but I don't believe there was a ton of support for the Civil Rights Act of 1960.
No, you're right. You're right.
Right.
There wasn't a ton, but it was a little bit more than the Kennedys.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think so, but let's also remember that Kennedy did change, and he did come around, and he became friendly with Martin Luther King, and so did Lyndon Johnson. But Lyndon Johnson had Martin Luther King in the White House frequently, and they butted heads quite a bit too. There was a lot of hostility at some point because Lyndon did not like the fact that Martin Luther King was anti-war and vocally anti-war and undermining Lyndon Johnson's policies. But they came to respect each other. And I think, again, that it had a lot to do with Lyndon Johnson's determination. And, he was an obstinate man. He was stubborn in the best of ways for a politician. And one of the greatest members of Congress, one of the most powerful, indeed, and one of the most influential members of Congress in history. What he would say now about Texas politics, I could only wonder what he would say now. That's all.
He'd be rolling in his grave.
Well, politics make strange bedfellows, and I can only imagine Lyndon Johnson and Martin Luther King trying to keep Malcolm X at bay.
Yeah, well, I could tell you also that King knew Malcolm X also. I don't know if I use the word friendly, but they respected each other. And there's a very famous picture of them both of them laughing together. It's a very epic photograph. But that was two different divides in the civil rights protest in this country from the mid-'60s. Martin Luther King died in 1968 at the hands of a gun, and in 1965, Malcolm X died at the hands of a gun. But those were Islamic nationalists who killed him.
Sure.
So, all I can tell you is, there were a lot of interesting sidebar stories to all of this stuff. And I could also.
And who killed Martin Luther King, Roy Firestone?
James Earl Ray.
Yeah.
Did the FBI have anything to do with it?
I would not even be intelligent enough to comment on something like that, so I go with what the standard information is that James Earl Ray may. I don't believe that he might have, but listen, people have all kinds of conspiracy theories about who killed President Kennedy, who killed, everybody, the planes going into the towers, all kinds.
Well, what's your theory about who killed Kennedy?
Well, I was a conspiracy theory buff.
I know you have an alibi.
What is that? What's my alibi?
That it wasn't something, you weren't there. I wasn't accusing you.
That's right. That would be one alibi. But
right. You were in high school or whatever.
No,
but
I was in elementary.
What do you think, just off the top of your head? It's not a right or wrong. I'm just curious.
Well, my opinion is, having years and years and read every book, read the Warren Report, everything, I still believe to this day that it was Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone. I believe the shots could have been fired from that distance, at that trajectory. I think technology has proven that it could happen, and they did happen. And I think one last thing, if there was a vast conspiracy, rumor and innuendo, it travels fast. And I think if one person knew, 100 people would know, and 100 people knew, 1,000 people would know. The fact is, and I think Norman Mailer once put it best when he said, it's hard for people to accept the fact that some idiot up in a window could by himself take down a great man like John F. Kennedy. We don't want to.
Well, how did Ruby get into the police station? He was a known thug or whatever he was.
Well, no, actually, he had mafia ties, but he owned a strip bar not terribly far from where they were moving Oswald to another jail. And the truth is, he was friends with a lot of the cops and the sheriffs because he let them come to the bar and bought him drinks. And so they knew him. It was like, at that time, nobody realized that he was going to take a gun and shoot Oswald. So I believe he was allowed in there because he was sort of a face that people knew. And no one questioned
exactly.
As crazy as that may sound, but it's true. Now, again, there's all kinds of thoughts and innuendos. A lot of books, thousands of books have been written about it.
But you can say it might be crazy that if a guy is shot from behind, his head goes backwards. But
there's, well, again, I'm not going to get into a whole physics thing here, but the Warren Report suggests that there was a kind of, don't forget that the limousine driver hit the brakes, which would have driven a human body backwards. At the moment that final shot hit President Kennedy in the head, he hit the brakes, which may have shoved him backwards. There's a lot of ways to look at it. Bottom line is, you asked my question. My answer is, I believe Oswald now, and I didn't always, by the way. I believe now Oswald did act alone. He had motivation to do so. His palm print was on the gun barrel. He tried to shoot somebody a few weeks before. He ordered that gun. It was definitely the photograph of him with the gun. There's a million reasons, but the bottom line is, as disturbing as the whole incident was, and I grew up with it in America, as you both did too, it came to be that just one guy, or at least that's what I choose to believe, one guy could take 3 shots from a depository window, and 2 of them would hit. And it's a tragedy one of the greatest tragedies in American history. But the bottom line is,
it changed the world.
It changed the world, and
America
for sure. But
absolutely.
That's my question. That's my view of it.
Yeah.
Well, you know what my suggestion is in the world? Is that they drive Trump by a bunch of grassy knolls every day and see what happens.
Well, I'm not going to go there, but
all right. Just to see what happens. I'm not going there. I'm just saying it would be a nice drive. You get the fat ass out there, and he drives around, and he doesn't have to play golf at the baby's expense. Anyway, we're just surmising. We're playing What If on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Roy, you have been a pleasure. I hope
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Did you ever meet Jackie, Roy?
I never met any Kennedys. Not one.
No, Jackie Robinson.
Not Jackie Kennedy.
Jackie Kennedy.
I'd be interested in that, Roy. But we're talking about Jackie Robinson.
Right. Let me tell you, the final point I want to make is, if I had my greatest regret in broadcasting is that Jackie died in, I believe, 72.
72, right.
Right, and I didn't get into broadcasting till 75, so I missed him by only 3 years. But I would have loved to have.
Yeah, he was such a great guy.
Just about everybody else. I had long conversations with people like Ted Williams, who was a friend of Jackie Robinson.
Yes,
I had long conversations with so many people who knew him, Duke Snyder and Koufax.
Sure.
Gosh, there's so many people who knew Jackie very, very well. Pee Wee Reese, of course, I had on the show many. But I never had a chance to meet Jackie. And I have a big painting of Jackie in my front of my house as you walk into my door. It's one of my favorite things, and he still represents one of the greatest figures in American sports. Probably, along with Muhammad Ali, the greatest figure in American sports history.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I was in Los Angeles a couple of years ago. Larry King flew me out there to do an interview. And he was telling me the first time he interviewed Martin Luther King, he introduced him as the founder of the Civil Rights Movement. And Martin Luther King stopped him and said, Larry, I have to correct you. I'm not the founder. Jackie Robinson was. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I've had a wonderful time talking to you. We'll do it again sometime. And I want to
thank you so much, buddy. I really appreciate it. Travel safe.
Take care.
When are you going to be in Milwaukee?
September. I don't have the dates yet, but there's 3 dates in September, one in Oshkosh, and back-to-back nights for the Bucks in Milwaukee with Kareem. And when we do those shows, if you somehow, some way could get down there, we'd love to see you.
I have a niece in Milwaukee. I'd love to come in. But can you let me shoot me the dates when you get to know?
I will do that. I will definitely
buddy.
do that.
Thanks.
Ronnie, are you still telling people that she's your niece?
All
right, guys. Listen, thank you, Roy.
Stay well.
Thank you, Ronnie. This is the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tyko, and we are out of here. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Roy. Bye-bye.